what's up, guys? As we get here into the depths of winter and as we're past college football season and getting more into pro football season, I start to get a whole bunch of memories back from the past. A couple of different things that really stand out to me. One of the big ones comes from back when I was a kid. I think I've mentioned this before, but back when I was probably starting about 6 years old, my dad, I grew up in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, and my dad had tickets, season tickets to BYU football. This is back in the days of 1990 with Ty Detmer's Heisman award-winning season, and with BYU having a team that for a little while was part of the national conversation, at least that year. And we held on to them for a couple of years and went to a whole bunch of home games. And I tell you, there's a whole bunch of good memories that are made from that. But the other thing that I've noticed, especially when I look at the college football landscape, is just how much things have changed, right? I mean, there's no question, right? I was thinking about this just last night when I was watching the NFL playoffs. There's no question that the NFL is a superior product than college football in terms of like the speed of players, in terms of their ability to actually carry out the plays, in terms of their experience, in terms of their size. I mean, really is a remarkable product. But that's not to say that there's no time or place for college football either. However, like many of you, I worry a lot about college football. I worry a lot that the more that finances, the more that money plays a role, the more likely it is that we're going to see sort of that special niche that college football has carved out over the years kind of disappear. I think that's sort of exemplified in sort of looking at what a college football stadium is like and how things have changed over time. So back when I was a kid, I remember going to these games at what was then called Cougar Stadium down in Provo, Utah. And I can remember we were sitting on the one of the end zone sides, like way up. I mean, it's a 66,000 seat stadium at the time, and we had what they called the old scoreboard to our back, which said basically the score and I think the time, and that was it. We were facing towards the new scoreboard, which at that time wasn't much. It was, I think, one of those old, was it even like a Diamond Vision type scoreboard? I have to really look back and see. It was a little bit bigger, and I think that it had the ability to do some like pixelated like animations. Like if you see screenshots of the old scoreboard at like Olympic Stadium or at like the Astrodome or whatever from like the 70s or 80s, it was that kind of technology. It kind of gave you this, it was cool to look up and see when I was like, in elementary school, but everybody's focus was on the actual game that was down on the field. And sure, we were really high up, but, you could go down, you could look down, you could see exactly what was happening, what the formations were, and kind of what the idea was. Now, 6-year-old me probably wasn't that sophisticated of a football fan, but, it had its own feel. And overall, the game back then, as I recall, had much more of I would say almost like an amateur feel to it, right? And definitely there was a feeling of community, right? All of the sponsors for the team, the majority of them were like local businesses. It was a lot of stuff that was headquartered, especially around the Provo, Utah area. There was definitely this feeling of connection between the school and the team. Now, you can fast forward a little bit, and this is also kind of old history. Back when I first attended BYU, this is 22 years ago, this was near the beginning of the Gary Crowden era, if you are familiar with BYU football lore. I had a student pass to attend games. I remember spending almost $200 for this thing. You would get the pass for all sports. It was the all sports pass. But they knew most people would want to go to football, and maybe a couple would want to go to basketball. I went to everything, man. I went to football, basketball, softball, baseball, and volleyball. I went to as much as I possibly could because I paid $200 for the thing, right? And I'm thinking I'm going to get my $200 worth. There's probably a reason why I didn't go on a lot of dates my freshman year. But what I remember being really frustrated with was this disconnect between the football program and the rest of campus, which had been totally different than what I'd known like 12 years before, right? There was this feeling on campus that like the football team was like some other thing out there, and the people who were interested in that would go to the games. But I don't remember anybody ever talking about the football team like in a class. I don't remember there being a lot of like groundswell of excitement for the team anywhere on campus. There was none of that. It was sort of like that was a different business almost that just happened to use the name of the school. I remember later on, probably around like 2006, 2007-ish, I can remember having roommates who were fans of other teams. I had a roommate who was a big Ohio State fan, right? And you think, well, that's got to be kind of weird to go to a different school. Well, not really, because again, like the college football you watch on Saturday has absolutely nothing to do with the school that you're attending, right? I mean, that's kind of how disconnected it was. Now, the thing I remember the most, and one of the reasons why I stopped getting this all sports pass when I was attending school there, what I remember is that there was no seating for students, right? You would just sort of be interspersed at football games somewhere in the big crowd in the big 66,000 or whatever, which took further away from the any sense of community and we are the school and we are anything like that. I remember there were people on online forums and also in the student newspaper talking about how we should coordinate what we wear for these games and stuff, but there was no real attempt to do that. And you couldn't do that because you had a whole bunch of older people who were paying for tickets sitting with students interspersed among them, right? Pretty big problem, and further giving this sort of feel of corporatism to the game. Now, I know that that's gone away since at BYU. They've done a much better job in recent seasons, right? But the whole college football landscape is continuing to push towards this kind of feeling of professionalism, corporatism, and being yet another product to be sold to fans, as opposed to the old feeling of, it's a bunch of alumni, it's a bunch of people who went to this school, it's like almost like family. Back when I was a kid, we knew the people who had the season tickets in front of us and behind us, right? It was all old guys, right? And we would talk with them, ask how their family's doing and stuff, talk about whatever it is we're seeing in the game, or talk about something completely different if the game was a blowout. The other thing I remember back then is that you could still bring in coolers full of food, right? And everybody would. I mean, everybody would come with those coolers, but especially on the real cold days, I'll never forget, there was a game I attended, and I can't remember the team or the year, but I remember attending this game that was just bitterly, bitterly cold, and I mean absolutely frigid. And I remember we bought hot chocolate probably at halftime, and probably before 10 minutes were gone in the third quarter, it had turned cold. In those little styrofoam cups and stuff like that. But it's an interesting thing. It's interesting to look at sort of how this has changed over time. And I do worry that as the college football landscape continues to march towards, major conferences, the big SEC, the big Big Ten, we'll see if the Big 12 is able to keep pace. I doubt it. But as we keep consolidating into these huge conferences with tons and tons of television money, I worry that the thing that made college football special and different than the NFL is starting to die out. Now, all this reminds me of another story. Here I am with another anecdote. About a decade ago, we lived in Ottawa, Canada, and I had a job that allowed me to interface with a lot of people who were, like member of parliament type level or local Canadian government employees. And, being kind of the smart aleck American I would always ask them about sports, but especially about hockey, right? I always ask them, what they recommend and what they think and stuff like that. And the funny thing is that every single person I talked to would tell me, hey, don't watch the NHL. You want to go watch junior hockey. That's where the real hockey is, right? And it was the same attitude and the same approach. The NHL is just a bunch of suits, right? You want to go see what real Canada's like. You've got to go watch like the Ottawa 67s, right? You got to go watch minor league hockey or junior hockey, and that's where it really is. And that's where you got people who are really putting in the sacrifice and are not being paid millions upon millions of dollars and so on and so forth, right? Now, I mean, I went to a Senators game and I went to 67s game. There's definitely a big, big difference in terms of quality of play. Something I would say is probably akin to like watching, again, like a Big 12 football game versus watching the NFL. There's a definite difference there in terms of quality. But what's interesting to me is this notion and this feeling that the pure sport is not the professional type, but it's rather this sport with a much more amateur feel to it, right? That's where the real sport lies, and that's what we should focus on. I think that today, when we're talking a lot about college football and about the changes that have come in the landscape, I really think that a lot of us are longing for those older days, when it felt more like an actual school event and it felt like it was part of the school community, right? So those are just sort of my thoughts on the subject. I'm really interested to know actually what the rest of you think. I'm especially interested in knowing if my experience way back in 1990 is different than what any of you have experienced in the past. I can tell you my grandfather went to Yale. He passed away a long time ago. He used to tell stories, though, about going to football games at the old old Yale Bowl and going to see Harvard play against Yale back in like the late 40s, right? And I mean, what I recall from those stories is, again, there was still that feeling of the great cult of the amateur, and that, this was a real sort of on campus type sporting activity, right? Again, much different, I think, than what you get today. So let me know what you think. Let me know right or wrong either way. And I'll be back next week with some more stuff. Talk to you then. Bye.